Hey everyone, and welcome to Read This Now, the weekly webcast where Brad Gustafson and I'm pointing one of these ways will point to you, Brad. I know that it will,
I
right?
feel like it's an interpretive dance.
The weekly and really professional webcast in which Brad Gustafson and I share two books that we love and we think you should read. When, Brad?
Right now, people, I feel like I should stick to my patented intro move, which kind of
I love it.
yeah, I've got that
I love
mastered.
it. I think that's really why my dogs are real excited about it too. You can hear. I think that's why at least two of our three viewers tune in to see you do your
Exactly.
interpretive dance.
Yep.
Yes,
I was
exactly.
analyzing the YouTube metrics, and it looks like most people tune out after the big intro.
Yes,
No, just kidding.
exactly. I would too. I practically do it as myself. So, what you been reading this week, my friend?
So in a show first,
Yes.
I woke up this morning intent on talking about book A.
Uh-huh.
And I was also reading a different book, and I'm going to talk about book B instead, and I'll share the other book
Amazing.
different just because this book was so unique and talkable.
I
So
can't wait.
I'm reading this book. I'm going to do a teeny teaser before just sharing the cover, but it was really interesting. It's a rare thing in a book, I think, where dialogue is done so artful that it doesn't get in the way and appear really clunky or forced. And this one pulled it off to a T. And I didn't count, but I would say it's a running, and you might be able to start to guess what I'm talking about. But there's probably, it starts out where just two people are kind of talking. You don't know
Mm-hmm.
much about them, and then another voice is kind of introduced. And by the end of this thing, it's probably maybe 6 or 7 voices having this dialogue, and it never really
Mm-hmm.
tells you who they are, but just by what they're saying, you get to know who they are and some things they stand for. And some of it is in staunch opposition to what the other person is saying. And you're probably wondering, well, what's the big deal? Lots of books have dialogue. Well, one of the main differences is the way it appears. Like, again, it doesn't say Jen said. It's literally just the comments, but the font is a little bit different, so you can kind of
Sure.
understand what the author's trying to do. And then the placement or the indenting on the page, like one person's vantage point always comes in like tabbed in, and another is over on the side. So
Gotcha.
you kind of start to see in a really strange, artful way their identity and who's talking, and you connect the story, even though it never told us really any of that. So, like, why does that matter? Here's why it matters. The book is Kent
I knew
State.
it.
You
I
did?
knew it. Yes,
So
I knew it.
that's
Yay.
awesome. That means
Uh-huh.
I'm saying things that actually make sense about the book then,
Yeah.
if you were able to guess. So I think this just came out this year, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, why does that matter? So the book is really good. It's actually a relatively quick read, which is kind of fun sometimes to just be able to plow through a book in a short amount of time. But what I really loved about this book is, to me, it encapsulates a lot of what happens in our everyday life and in the struggle just for things that are right,
Right.
and that people don't always see eye to eye on. I think like the importance of dialogue and pursuing understanding and higher truths that we don't have to bicker
Yes.
about. Like, can we just agree on this thing, and we may not agree on the process and this and this? We can get to that conversation, but instead of trying to beat you at the conversation or walk away winning, it's more about like, this
Yes.
matters to us. And even though we
Yes.
experienced it drastically different and we disagree about a lot, it was a moment in time that matters. So anyway, it reminds me of this, but also some things that are happening today that are really important. And instead of having conversations shut down, and like, there's some big stuff that probably we should agree on, and then we can figure out the process while
Right.
we're keeping the dialogue going. So read this now. That's it, Jen.
I
Now do you see
loved,
why I had to flip to this
yes,
book?
yes, I loved that book, and I have to admit I'm biased because I think I love every book that Deborah Wiles uh, pro, produces or writes. I mean, she is such a unique voice and an incredible author and resource for young people. Her catalog is so vast and different. But Kent State, to me, you summed it up so perfectly. I've talked to other people about that book, and it's like the way just the physical layout of things on the page sort of
Yes.
mirrors the like cacophony of noise that we're bombarded with, and you really have to listen. That's it. Yes, like you
Yes,
have
I'll
to
show you just
listen.
one page, and it's pretty random, this page, and it might look like, oh my goodness, how can you make sense of that?
Mhm.
But the cadence of the book, you perfectly get it, and it flows, and it's
Right.
so cool and eloquent and artful and natural and real. Like, it felt
Mhm.
like I was privy to a pretty authentic conversation. And again, authentic in a sense that people are kind of shutting each other down and disagreeing, and
Yes.
it was really cool. I do want to say one quick thing, and I think going back a year or two or three, however long we've been getting together for these conversations, like, why do we do this? The reason that I circled back to this book and picked it up was on Twitter. Our friend, or my friend Julie Kirchner, everybody's friend,
Mhm.
had tweeted
Yeah.
about it recently,
Yeah.
and it's just like the testament or the power of talking about the books we love and sharing our reading
Mhm.
lives that matters. And it's not just about sharing, it's really about that gift that other people can receive. So I'm not saying I'm sharing any gifts by any means, but at least like when other people are offering them up, they do make a difference. So thanks to Julie, but to everyone else who actually is sharing their reading life, like, people are listening. People like
Yes.
me, we're noticing what you're reading and why you're
Mhm.
reading it, and you're inspiring us to do the same.
Me too. I feel the same way. It's like what a great problem to have, but I feel like I have a to be read pile that I will never, if I stopped doing everything else and did nothing but read for the rest of my life, I would never, still not ever get through it because it's just so massive. And like I said, what an awesome problem to have. But that problem is a direct result of all these wonderful, smart, you know, kind people who, thoughtful people who share their reading lives so generously and inspire me to pick up more books, you included, and of course, Julie and countless others. So I'm just glad to be
And it does
part of
remind
that
me,
conversation.
not to be a clanging cymbal, but like we've talked about this before, there are so many great books out there. We probably shouldn't always force ourselves to finish a book that we're not quite digging in that moment.
Right.
Like, find one that really is captivating, or for whatever reason, and filling your bucket. And you can always circle back to the other one or not. And the same thing
Right.
is for kids. Like, if given the choice between kind of, torture is not the right word I want to, having them struggle through a book and just really not
Right.
like it, as opposed to finding one that they might actually fall in love with and develop this
Hmm.
lifetime love of reading. Like, let's maybe not always force
That's
them
right.
to do that. So
Yeah, I mean, finishing the pages is not the marker of success. It's growing a reading life, wanting to read, seeing the value of reading in your life, looking forward to the next book. Those are the markers of success, I think, that we should really be shooting for, as opposed to being able to say, I got through all 100 and whatever pages. Because if it's really is
right.
an onerous task that to do it, then really I don't know what that's accomplished for you long term. Um, so, or even in the short term. So I couldn't agree more. But it's interesting because Brad, you and I, every week, we never discuss these shows. We don't plan ahead. And yet somehow I feel like
We've only done it once in the show
only
history,
once,
but go
only once
ahead.
in show history. Exactly.
Yeah.
But I feel like our choices parallel each other so often, even though we don't ever discuss them, because just like you, although this isn't the first time for me, but just like you, I had planned to book talk a different book and decided to do a different, decided to go with book B, as you put it. Um, and then also, this was a book that was recommended to me by someone else. I didn't see it on Twitter, but a friend of mine texted me and said, Jennifer, oh my gosh, you'd have to pick up this book. And so I did, and I wasn't able to put it down. I read it in one night, and I've been, thinking, oh my gosh, ever since that night, which was just 2 nights ago, I've got to share this on Read This Now, even though I had a different book in mind. And the book is called Unrig, and you can see the graphic that's on the front. I hope you all can see that it's a wrench, but I don't know. Can you see, Brad, what's
Yes.
embedded in that wrench?
Yep.
Okay. And then the tagline is how to fix our broken democracy. And that sounds like a really serious topic, right? And it is. But
Yep.
there's so many cool things about this book. The first of which is that it's a beautifully drawn graphic novel, which of course,
Mm.
I love. But what I think is so interesting about this book is that its premise is not about how one set of beliefs is better than another set of beliefs. It is about the idea that people, or in many cases, organizations or corporations, have more power and voice in our government than individual people do. And what the entire book is about is sharing stories from around the country where individual people have been able to change that in their local governments to make it so that people have more voices in democracy. And so, and I learned one of the, I think the markers of a great book sometimes is not that you get your own beliefs confirmed, that you open up a book and that it tells you, it makes you feel like, yes, I'm right. That to me is not the marker of a great book. Oftentimes the marker of a great book is that it challenges you to learn more, and you develop and grow as a thinker as a result of what you learn in the book. And that was what this book did for me. For example, let me give you an example from the book. I had no idea this was true, Brad, and yet it is just a few miles away from my house here in Washington State. And I learned that it was true in many other cities across the country. In Seattle, listen to this. This is going to blow your mind. Get ready, okay? Mind blown. I'm predicting. In Seattle, every year, they send all registered voters what they call democracy vouchers. Have you ever heard of such thing?
Nope.
Okay, so here's what happens with a democracy voucher is that every registered voter gets $100 worth of them, and they can give that $100 as though it was donating to a campaign to any person running for office in the Seattle area of their choice. So for local elections, right? Like for mayor, for city council, etc. And so theoretically, any person running for local office then can raise, think about how many hundreds of thousands of registered voters there are in Seattle, can raise hundreds of thousands of dollars by actually talking directly to the voters rather than trying to court big donors, right? And so they decided a few years ago to create these and give them to registered voters. And then they did this thing where they tracked the elections that were eligible for the democracy vouchers versus those that were not. And here's what they found is that in the races that the democracy vouchers were in play, that the votes for the candidates came from people all across the Seattle area versus those that did not have democracy vouchers. They came, the voters for that, the winning candidate came from very specific pockets of the population, which tended to be the very wealthiest in the city. So the democracy vouchers actually made the election process more democratic, where there was a wider spread of voters from across the city as opposed to just certain pockets. It's fascinating, right? And so this whole book is about stories like that, where 1, 2, 10 people decide we want to change government in our area, and so we're going to have we've come up with an idea like a democracy voucher, and we're going to implement it in our area and see what happens. And all of them are an attempt to give voice back to individual people as opposed to large corporations or the very, very wealthy. And it's just so interesting and fascinating. And this book is targeted, even though it's a graphic novel, I think its target audience is adults. But oh my gosh, as an 8th grade teacher, I thought I wanted to have this in my social studies classes or any American history class, because it unpacks how government really works, how you run for an office, how much money it costs to run for an office, and how you end up getting that money, etc. And really at a local level. And it doesn't mention parties and it doesn't mention platforms. It just talks about the inner workings of government and how it is set up really to benefit people with lots of money as opposed to just the average citizen, and then give us steps to fix that. So I was really blown away by it. It was called, again, Unrig, How to Fix Our Broken Democracy, and it's by Daniel G. Newman.
Cool. Hey, Jen, as I was listening to that, what I've noticed on social media and just the news, things feel incredibly partisan, and sometimes
Mhm.
that shuts down thinking. Like people are, or it has people pursuing things like you maybe alluded to earlier to validate their current thinking, or we
Mhm.
get defensive. Um, and I suppose I wonder, just even on the example you shared, if people listening might, um, if their defense mechanisms or judgment might get clouded just at a certain story. Because even though you didn't talk about political parties, so sometimes people make those connections. So here's what I'm thinking. I want to also connect to what I shared earlier about the importance of dialogue and
Mhm.
conversation. Like prime example of, not everyone who heard that example might be in love with it, but could we at least check our preconceived notion at the door and at least say, well, do we believe in democracy? And
Mhm.
then who's democracy for? And do we believe that people should, like, that their voice matter? And just if we can, in an unloaded sense, like I'm interested in also having those conversations and then trying to figure out and talk about some of those process pieces as well with
Mhm.
politics and in life, because I do think there are some overarching things that we all care about, and I could be
For
naive about
sure.
this. And there is value in wading in the waters and doing the tough work of listening, learning, and humbly showing up to, instead of to advance an agenda, to actually like learn
Mhm.
about someone else and how they're seeing things. So I feel like that kind of commingles, but it just reminded me of like dialogue, and books can be a great catalyst for dialogue, not to perpetuate an ideal system or agenda, but to actually start a real conversation with diverse viewpoints.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting because I see this online all the time, and we're both fallible adult human beings with um, beliefs and values. Like we both have, no person can claim to be totally neutral about everything. We all have those, and sometimes, interactions with people can cause you to react in a way that sometimes later you think, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that, right? And so if we can figure out exactly what you said, what we have in common, and come to the table with those things ahead, then I think we have a better chance of being able to listen to, to come to like some kind of solution to problems that we're facing. There's been a
Right.
bunch of interesting studies where you ask people, to just say things like about, you ask them to talk about the sources of information that they trust, and people have really entrenched beliefs about that, like, I don't trust any information that comes from this, or I don't trust any person who believes this, or people have really entrenched beliefs about that. But if you show them information like headlines or pieces of data with the sources removed, you find that they agree with and believe lots of things from sources that they say they don't really trust, but they're just triggered by whatever associations they make with that person or that party or that whatever. Um, so it's so hard. I don't think we can solve any of that in our 20-minute book talk program, nor is that why people came here, but it's
Right.
hard not
Hey, I
to
couldn't,
read
on a
books.
lighter note, I couldn't help but notice, like, I often need a life preserver, like throw me some help, but now symbolically you have it right over your shoulder for the times I'm
Yes.
drowning on the show and need some help. So it's right there. You can grab it, throw it to me. I appreciate the nod, the hat tip. Thank you.
No, I just, this is our program. We don't script it so that we can have these honest, real conversations. And it's hard not to read any book at all through those lenses now, but particularly a book like Kent State, which I think was, I say, can't get in the heart of Deborah Wiles, but I'm guessing that she thought it was an important story to tell because of the world we live in now. So we can not, fall prey to repeating history. And then a book like Unrig, which is blatantly saying, hey, our system is broken. And it's not about one belief
Mhm.
set being wrong or one another set being right. It is really just about making sure that people have a voice. And I think we
Yeah.
all can, we can all get behind that if we think about it. But anyway, that's the power
I
of
could
reading. We've
talk.
gotten
I
really
could literally.
philosophical.
You got me all fired up, and I'm ready to either talk more or start getting redundant. So everyone will breathe a collective sigh of relief. I'm not going to do that, but I am going to mention our website if you want to
Yes.
check out some other books Jen and I have talked about, either via video or just see the list. It's at bit.ly/read_. Oh, I'm totally botching it, Jen. _this_now, right?
You
Okay.
got it. You got it. Well done, my friend.
Where's that life preserver when I need it?
It's right behind me. Thanks, everyone, for joining us this week, and we'll see you next week. Happy reading.